Viewers, welcome to the Personal Injury Law Show. This is a show that talks about everything current in the law of personal injuries. My name's Tony Carbone. I'm a personal injury lawyer with 30 years experience. With me tonight I've got a partner in a law firm in car accidents, Don Maffia. Good evening, Don.
Good evening, Tony. Good evening, viewers.
And also the branch leader in a law firm and handles car accidents, Cameron Cowan.
Good evening,
Tony.
Cam. G'day, viewers.
Viewers, tonight we're going to be talking about the regional Victoria and in particular the accidents that occur out there involving quad bikes, farming equipment, etc. So it's must-see TV.
Tony, before we get on to that, tell us what's in the news.
Well, there's been a lot of stories. But before that, Cam, I want to talk to you about this talk about high-tech seat belts that warn drivers when they're about to fall asleep and in fact slow the car down. Tell me a bit about this.
There's been a study in the UK about seatbelts and a waking process to wake people up if they're going to go to sleep. Obviously, introducing these sorts of technologies is vital when we see people falling asleep on country roads. Obviously, if you fall asleep, there's no chance to break it all, Tony. So you'll be hitting a tree at about 100 k's an hour, and we see shocking injuries.
Don, the technology is going to be so sophisticated that if you're about to fall asleep, this technology is going to make the car slow down.
Mercedes-Benz have already introduced technology which the car can read if a person is fallen asleep or fatigued. If the car moves over too far over a lane or something, the car slows down. Look, Tony, why not? If it can be done, why not? It just brings more safety to the cars.
Oh, look, I'm all for it. I guess the only thing is, if the car starts to slow down on a main road, let's say on a highway at 100 kilometres an hour and stops to a halt, could be a real risk for the cars behind too.
Oh, exactly, Tony. The drivers travelling behind that vehicle would be at
serious risk.
Serious risk.
Yeah, no, look, it's interesting. We'll follow this up in the future. Don, what about this tributes flow for the gas heater victims? This poor lady.
Very tragic circumstances. It was out in Ballarat, Cam,
yes,
where a young mother and her partner and a dog were in a car. No one really knows why they're in the car, but they're sleeping, but they had a butane gas heater in the car, Tony.
It's like a heater that the people use for camping and the like. It's got a small gas canister which plugs into the heater and is not really designed to be used in confined spaces, Tony.
Well, look, this is a classic example that you got to use this equipment. It was not used for its intended purposes. It's not enclosed areas, Tony. And this, they put in the car. The whole three, the dog and the young mother and the partner, all passed away. So it's a very tragic circumstances, but it is a warning to all our viewers. You've got to use it for your intended purposes.
And Cam, would it have been a suicide or just, just bad luck?
I don't believe there's any allegation of suicide. There's a view that potentially the people were homeless, although that's been disputed in the local papers.
Is there any liability on anyone in this, Don?
Look, Tony, I wouldn't think so. Just again because these type of gas heaters, they're not meant to be used in the circumstances that they'd used, and there was all warning. There would have been warnings on those the equipment as well. Look, so I wouldn't think so. I think this is just a tragic circumstance.
Let's move on, viewers. This interesting case of a police payout to a nurse after being bashed by a crazy drug user. This fellow's jumped out of a police van. Give us the facts.
A drug user was failed to be adequately restrained by Victoria police officers and attacked a nurse down in the Latrobe Valley region. The nurse was able to settle her claim for damages for in excess of $500,000. Subsequent to the resolution, which it seems were for major injuries including spine and leg injuries, the Victorian Work Cover Authority attempted to recover some of that money from the Victoria Police Force.
Don, Just curiously, the police have picked up this person who's very, very over the top on whatever drugs he's taking. He jumps out of the police van and assaults her at the hospital. There's liability there?
Yes. The problem here, Tony, is that the police did not warn the hospital that they're bringing in a distressed or agitated person. In this case, it was drug-induced, appeared a bit aggressive, and they knew about that. And that's why they're bringing him to the hospital, and they never could have just made a phone call. So the hospital then could have prepared and put on their extra staff, or extra security guards or something like that. And they failed to adequately restrain this person.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's more a case of lacking to not properly restraining the person.
Yeah. So look, the police obviously they've paid up really in this case. She was entitled to what appears to be a $500,000 settlement. She's 42, never worked again, or never likely to work.
Well, it took her 5 years to settle her case, so she probably got payments for another 4 to 5 years.
Yeah.
So it could have been in excess of $700,000.
Yeah, and look again,
right
it's just got to get the protocols right. I think in these circumstances where, again, the police know that this person's actually distressed. Right, they should probably hold them back, not restrain or just let them loose and let the hospital try and deal with them. Yeah. The hospital's not, as we're at the moment, Tony, hospitals are struggling to deal with these issues.
Clearly a case of someone not doing their job properly by the sounds of things.
Sounds like it.
What about this poor young fellow that was killed on a work site in Canberra? He was only a 21-year-old, Ben Catanzariti. Tell us about this one, mate.
Well, it's a failure to properly maintain what was a concrete boom. So concrete boom fell on this person, it's this young 21-year-old. The maintenance of the machine wasn't properly done. So the equivalent to the WorkSafe in Canberra, they've actually charged not only the maintenance engineer, but the employer as well. What
about the family? Have they got a claim?
Well, look, again, if it happened in Victoria, I'm assuming in Canberra too, but yes, definitely, they've got dependency claims, they've got all these entitlements that arise from the workers' compensation. But Tony, this is a classic, beware, I mean, the engineer had a responsibility. I mean, he's been added, just not the employer has been charged, but he personally has been charged as well.
And also, Cam, it's a case of these accidents, once you happen, they only have to happen once, you don't get a second chance, do you?
No, it's clearly a tragedy, and employers should be aware of the fact that, particularly in the ACT, we can see that there's a potential $3 million fine to the company.
Exactly.
And also potentially 5 years jail for the individual who's been charged.
So if you had a girlfriend or fiancé, dependency claim, otherwise nervous shock?
Yes.
Nervous shock, Don?
Yep.
Okay. This is for your benefit, Cam. You're trying to tell me that a couple of these athletes that are performing the Commonwealth Games were people that you raced against?
Well, one was.
Really?
Yeah, Collis Birmingham.
How'd you go?
Not well. He defeated me by a long way. So
I think it's fair to say, Tony, if Cam won the race, he wouldn't be here talking to us. He would be just
sure
coming back from
that.
Commonwealth Games.
How did your mate go? Did he win?
I don't think he did win. I think he made the final.
Okay. Well, that's a good effort. Viewers, stay tuned after the break. We're going to talk about the risks of people in rural Victoria, in particular farm accidents and farm equipment. Viewers, welcome back to the show. Today we're very fortunate to have two transport accident lawyers on the show, but in particular one, Cameron Cowan's from the region of Ballarat. Yes. Big city these days, Cam?
Yeah, it is, Tony.
And Cam, we're highlighting and talking about the risks associated with people living in regional Victoria, that is car accidents on the road.
Yes.
Farming.
Yes.
Use of quad bikes. Anything else?
Oh, look, in regional areas we tend to have transport accidents at higher speeds. Often people are travelling around the country areas at sort of 100 kilometres an hour. It tends to lead to people being more seriously injured than what tends to occur in our city environments where cars and vehicles are travelling more slowly.
Don, a lot of those accidents that occur on those country roads They're horrific. People are killed. There's no doubt about it.
Oh, no doubt. Because country roads, you're looking at 100 kilometre speed limit, sometimes 110, depending on where you are.
People being on the wrong side of the road.
Being on the road, we're swerving, veering, falling asleep, fatigue, the whole lot, Tony. So these accidents tend to be quite severe.
Now, one of the things we're going to be looking at, and I kept warning my kids when they went overseas, is the use of these quad bikes. There's a video provided by the ACCC to talk about the risks and accidents revolving around these quad bikes. But what is a quad bike, Cam?
Tony, quad bikes are four-wheel drive vehicles. There's a bit of a misconception that they're an all-terrain vehicle, so that it's safe to ride up and down hills. Often riding down hills leads to injury and rollovers. There's a lot of issues with respect to quad bikes, in particular inappropriate training to use the quad bikes, overloading of the quad bikes, more than one person riding on a quad bike when it's made for one person, not wearing a helmet.
Like Cam says, it appears to be a misconception. It's not an all-terrain vehicle. You think four wheels is safer than two wheels, but in this case it's not. And these vehicles, these quad bikes, are very susceptible to rollovers. And there's nothing to protect you. Once you roll over, this metal comes on top of you, this quad bike's on top of you, can cause very severe injuries.
Well, since 2001, we've had 150 Australians die from quad bike accidents. That doesn't include all the seriously injured, because when you roll it, a lot of them fall on, land on their head.
And they can weigh 300 kilograms.
Oh, yeah. So you're dealing with people that have got quadriplegia, brain damage, all sorts of things. So if you do survive and you've had one of those rollovers done, I mean, you're going to survive with some pretty serious pain, suffering and other consequences to your family and loved ones, correct?
Of course. And then, look, Tony, in the other studies, there's 21 quad bike-related fatalities in 2013. And a further stat was that of the deaths over the 3 years, 1 in 6 involved children under 14 years of age, Tony.
Well, it just shows you no one's really taking them seriously. There's this, because they look stable, right, and they're not.
No.
And that's why they're only meant to be driven on flat land and not hilly.
Yep.
Correct?
That's correct. And again, Tony, that's where the big misconception out there is. They're not an all-terrain vehicle. You've got to be used for very limited purposes, pretty much just flat land, because you can hit just a rock and a little bit unstable. Bang. Over you go.
And just curiously, are they a vehicle under the Transport Accident Act? Are they registered?
They're a registrable vehicle.
Yep. So does that mean you're covered, Don?
Look, there's a lot of tests about that, Tony. You can register these vehicles. I mean, for example, the Victoria Police use quad bikes. Yep. In fact, there was an incident involving a quad bike and a pedestrian. That's another story, but a police quad bike and pedestrian. But they are registrable. They can be registered. And if they're not registered but have been used on public roads, they can fall under the scheme of the Transport Accident Act, but each case turns on its own facts.
Tony, I've often seen farmers who have rolled their quad bikes, and because they're self-employed people and they haven't got the registration, they don't get any payments for the first 18 months because they're not riding a registered
But after 18 months, are they covered?
The loss of earning capacity benefits would kick in after that time in some circumstances.
And what about medical-like expenses, Don?
Medical-like, if they fall under the scheme, and that's why it's quite important, Tony, that farmers, particularly when they're using it for work and on the quad bikes and rely on the quad bikes, they should inquire about whether or not those vehicles should be registered.
Okay.
And they should contact the Vic Roads.
So it's important that if you're in this situation, get legal advice, because obviously there's a lot of permutations that will change circumstances in which you are covered. Yeah.
Look, each case on its own facts. I mean, if it's a quad bike that's been repeated use, that could be registered or had been registered in the past, or repeated use on a public road, not on private land, they could fall under the scheme. Whereas if it's never been used, never been registered, never used on public road, never registered, then they don't fall in within the scheme. And that's why it's quite important, if you are relying on a quad bike for part of your day-to-day living, you should inquire about you getting registered with Vic Roads, which covers you under the Transport Accident Act.
Cam, is there a positive onus on the owner of a quad bike to explain to a child, not a child, but someone 14, 15 years old, the risks?
Well, there'd definitely be an onus from an employer on a farm-type situation to ensure that the rider of the quad bike was adequately trained in the using of the quad bike, to make sure it was safely maintained, and also to make sure that they're not overloading the quad bike.
Yep, yep.
I think it would be more questionable in terms of the onus between an owner and a recreational user.
Yep.
But I'd imagine it could extend that far.
Okay. Now, Don, assuming I'm in the quad bike with you, you're the driver, and you're cutting along the terrain,
Yep.
and all of a sudden, I hit a branch.
Yep.
Because you didn't see it.
Yep.
Can I see you?
I hope I've got insurance, Tony.
No,
I think you could.
You said that it could be picked up as a vehicle that should be registrable.
You could, if for example you're pillion passenger on this on this quad bike and I cause the accident, then I could be sued by you, and if the car or the motorcycle is not covered by the TAC because it's not a motor vehicle for the purpose of the Act, you could sue me personally.
And would you be covered by your homeowner's insurance?
If it extends that far, without making sure there's no exclusions, but it could. I could be indemnified by my own home contents. And again, it depends on the insurance policy that you have.
After the break, viewers, we're going to be dealing with prevention measures and also, importantly, how to protect your kids travelling on these regional school buses. Should they be fitted with seatbelts? Viewers, welcome back to the show. We're talking about the risks of using quad bikes. The one comment I'd like to make is not only are they a massive issue in Australia on farms and regional areas, but a lot of these children of ours travel overseas to places like Mykonos, and it seems to be one of the main ways of getting around on. And a lot of these kids are falling off their bikes, and it's very steep hills and everything there. So there's been a lot killed overseas and severely maimed at camp.
Yes.
So I think it's important that viewers sit down with their kids before they travel and say to them, listen, get up, don't go on those bikes.
And also, Tony, to have appropriate travel insurance if you travel overseas.
Oh, of course. That's important too.
I think, Tony, it doesn't necessarily mean if you've got 4 wheels, it's safe.
No, actually, the more wheels you got, the more risk you got because you think you're safe.
That's right.
The perception of being safe is even worse than... Exactly. Let's talk about these regional buses. A lot of them look like they're not fit for people to drive in.
Yeah, look, it's a bizarre situation, Tony, but there's been a period of decades where we're driving around in cars where we're required to wear seatbelts. In this state at the moment, our regional students are driving around on school buses at 100 kilometres an hour without school buses on a lot of routes.
Don, there's been a lot of accidents in regional Victoria, buses travelling at 100 kilometres an hour, and children have sustained severe injuries.
Yeah. So, Tony, 100 kilometres per hour on a country road too, Tony.
Yes.
So, unfortunately, some country roads are not up to spec with what we appreciate in the city. So, look, Tony, as soon as there's an accident like that, kids aren't restrained. At 100 kilometres per hour, it's going to cause serious injuries. But even if there's no collisions, it could even just be heavy braking.
Yes.
At 100 kilometres, if you heavily brake...
Well, just on that issue, a 10-year-old schoolgirl, Emily Blake, in 2012 suffered severe brain damage when thrown from severe heavy braking.
So not necessarily collision. So the government has tried to introduce, or is introducing, or has introduced, but it's going to take over 10 years to get compulsory seatbelts on these buses in the regional Victoria. 10
years.
It's a long time, Tony. When I was back at school in Year 7, a few of my mates were injured in a bus crash, and that's back in the mid-90s, and still we're having people exposed to the same risks.
I'm just curious to know, a lot of these regional buses, are they government-owned or are they privately owned?
I believe they're owned privately.
I think there might be a mixture, but with this campaign, it's going to be no cost to the private owners, Tony. So the government's going to fund the seatbelts being placed in these buses.
Yeah, the government's retrofitting the seatbelts over a period of 10 years to bring things up to speed. but obviously 10 years may be 10 years too long for some people.
And by that time, the bus is out of date anyway, so it won't be any good.
Tony, there's currently 1,400 school buses operating in country Victoria. Why is it taking them 10 years to put seatbelts on each of those buses?
Well, that means they're only doing about, what, 140 a year, Cam?
Yeah, it does. We'd call for it to happen sooner.
It's just bizarre. I mean, if that was one of us, let's say for argument's sake, someone had said to you, look, your car's not up to speed and someone gets injured in it, we'd get criminally prosecuted, wouldn't we?
Of course you would.
And, and yet the government knows the risks and, they say we're going to do something about it. It's going to take them 10 years to do it, which is bizarre.
Tony, would it be a funding issue?
Of course it's funding. It's always funding. Everything about this country is about funding.
Yeah.
Can I ask you two, who are experts in car accident cases, people get injured in these accidents, quad bikes, school buses. You're a partner in Tony Carbone, Don.
Yes.
What do you recommend to the public? What do they do?
Contact a lawyer, because these people who are injured in a transport accident, they're entitled to receive benefits. In Victoria, it's pursuant to the TAC, Tony, and that can include medical expenses, wages, lump sum benefits, and if you prove fault, which in these cases, if you're a passenger in a bus and you're injured, you can sue the bus company.
Cam, I'm going to come to you. 10-year-old schoolgirl Emily Blake, thrown from the bus or on the bus because of severe braking.
Yes.
Common law. Big claim?
I would have thought it'd be a massive claim, Tony.
Okay, what are the benefits available to her?
Well, in Victoria, a person would be entitled to their medical expenses funded for life by the TAC. The person would also be entitled to pain and suffering damages, provided she could prove fault, which
you would in this case.
Yeah, exactly, be able to be established in this case. And also a claim for financial losses into the future.
Would you... And they're all capped, aren't they? What are we talking here? What's the maximum you can get, roughly?
Yeah, in Victoria, it's a little over $500,000 for pain and suffering damages and close to $1.2 million for financial loss damages.
It's not a lot when you're considering a 10-year-old, is it, Don?
No.
So there's severe discounts applied to all these figures?
There is. So what happens in practice is a jury would announce a figure and then the judge just has to reduce it back to the maximums in the legislation.
Okay. What happens if you didn't want to take a lump sum settlement for loss of income? Could you stay on wages at what rate for a 10-year-old, Don?
Well, it's based average weekly earnings, but her impairment arising from this accident, when assessed in accordance with appropriate guidelines, is 50% or more.
Oh, without doubt.
With her type of injury, you suspect.
Yeah.
So, and the thing with these type of claims is you can't make a proper assessment until they go through their school years and look at what has been taken away from her. And it's hard to work out in a 10-year-old or younger the capabilities that she had going through school and what was open to her. It's a very hard case to assess, Tony.
Well, Cam, you've got to make a very important decision. Do you take the maximum for loss of income or do you stay on the average weekly earnings for loss of income?
Yeah, but often the situation with the loss of earning capacity benefits, it's based on average weekly earnings, but it's 80% of that amount. And also, there's no real capacity to argue. So if a person was to claim financial loss damages on the basis into the future, they could refer to mum or dad and look at their type of work to say, well, this is probably the path that we would have gone down.
But in addition to, Don, you're entitled to get the house renovated to assist?
You can also get the modification to any vehicles to assist as well if needed. Beds.
Kitchens, bathrooms,
I've had
living rooms.
I've had clients who...
Vehicles?
Vehicles. I've had clients where TAC have, in Victoria, they've placed an independent living unit in the back property. So things like that. But Tony, all this could have been prevented at an injury to Emily Blake by wearing a seatbelt. So,
but in any event, if something happens to you, this just shows and highlights the fact that you can't possibly advise yourself. Get legal advice. There's experts out there because even amongst the experts, they can't decide which course to take, whether you stay on benefits or if you get a lump sum settlement. So it's important you do it. Anything else, Don?
Tony, at Tony Carbone, this is what we deal with, this is what we're here to advise on. So if you are injured, if you have any queries, please contact us. And the debutante, Cam, anything else?
I think it's appropriate to get advice. Often it's a complicated area of the law, and as you said, if two of us not necessarily come to the same conclusion, it shows that these things can go down different paths.
Very complicated. Cam, thanks for coming on board. You know, no doubt you'll be back in the future. Don, as usual, thank you. Viewers, thanks for watching. Stay tuned for future episodes. Go to Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and always remember to stay safe.